Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the podcast where I, Gooey, rank all of the dungeons in The Legend of Zelda. And we're continuing our journey through A Link to the Past with the Eastern Palace. So, where we last left off, we were given the quest to go and seek out the Master Sword. That's what we need to defeat the evil in our quest, and we're told that the elder of the village of Kakariko would know the location of said Master Sword. So, you go off and you can explore the world now, all this stuff. We're going to mainly focus on the dungeon, but if you go to Kakariko Village, you will eventually talk to the grandson of the elder, and he tells you that he is hiding out due to the threat that is faced right now from Aghanim, and he tells you that he's over by the Eastern Palace, which is our destination. So, you can explore the world and all that stuff. You could actually even go straight to the Eastern Palace right now without doing all this, but your first time playing, you're probably going to be following the directions given to you by the characters. You can go and find Saharasla, I think I got that right, who is hiding out near the Eastern Palace, and he will tell you that you'll need these pendants in order to acquire it, and he encourages you to go to the Eastern Palace to gain the Pendant of Courage, and he tells you, come back and I will tell you more after you've done so. So, okay, this is a great setup. This is probably the most structure we've seen now for our dungeon questing here, is a character in-game telling us, as opposed to Impa in the manual in the last game. So sure, why not? So Eastern Palace, it sort of had me thinking right away about Zelda 2, because if you look at it, you look at the artwork, all this stuff, it does seem to be like this kind of abandoned palace, I guess you could say, and it sort of reminded me of all the palaces in Zelda 2, and it does have kind of this, when you picture a dungeon in your mind, this is kind of I'd say a quintessential sort of vibe that we're going for in terms of like a fantasy dungeon. You've got like this Stalfos in there, it's filled with skeletons, and then you've got these weird little, I don't even know what the Popos are, but they're these weird little, creatures that are on the ground. I don't know, you got your classic Zelda anti-fairies, which sort of resemble like bubbles bouncing around the screen. Just the basic stuff there. But we do have I think a new enemy here, which I think is really cool, and it fits the vibe really well, and that is the Igor, which they are these guys who kind of look like these statues, but they come to life, and they, of course, in Zelda fashion, have one eye, and they start coming for you. And the basic green ones that you first encounter, they, you can attack them with your sword or throw pots at them, and, that'll take them down. But later, you encounter these red ones, which you can only kill with the dungeon item, which is the bow. And so, already we're kind of seeing this dungeon item dynamic that we see later in Zelda come more full circle here. In this, it's less puzzle solving. You see it more really with the enemy of the Igor and the boss a little bit, but it still works here, I think. And in fact, like, you could kind of figure this out for yourself, but this game also has a new feature, which are these telepathic tiles, which are sort of similar. They kind of remind me of the old man hints in the original Legend of Zelda, but instead they're like these tiles you can find, and you'll be communicated to it telepathically through via Saharasla, or like even Zelda spoilers later in the game. So you can get a hint here about using the bow via the telepathic tile. So, it's a pretty solid one. I think you'd probably be able to figure it out on your own, but why not? nice little reminder here. And this is a good hint system, I think, compared to, I don't know, we'll see in later games. I think it spoils the fun of certain puzzles, but here this is good. This is just a nice little unobtrusive suggestion. The dungeon itself, in terms of puzzle elements, there's not too much going on here. I mean, it's actually kind of a step up compared to the previous games, so I'll give it that. But I guess I wouldn't even call this a puzzle, but you sort of have like these floor switches that are kind of blended with the floor, sort of hidden switches, and there's also parts in the dungeon where there's giant like balls that roll at you. There's the very memorable corridor where there's like little balls and then one giant one that can kind of crush you. Almost makes me think of like Indiana Jones or something. But and then later on there's a room that's just a bunch of balls being shot at you, and you have to find and hit, dodge them and hit the hidden switch to continue. It's nothing big, but I still think that it's pretty, what do you call it? It's simplistic, but it's, for early on, this is kind of the first like real dungeon in the game, and it's also one of the first real puzzles. We're just seeing a step up in terms of puzzles from just push a block, or I guess Zelda 2 had some good ones, but I think this is kind of, it's starting to really cement kind of the idea of little puzzles like that outside of just the navigation through the dungeon. Which, in terms of the navigation in the actual dungeon, I think this dungeon is great because it's actually very linear. It's extremely linear in terms of the path you have to take, but it doesn't feel like it. Like, there are times where you have to do minor divergences off to a side room to get a key to continue in the one room you're in. So it's not like, doesn't give you like big backtracking yet. Combined with like, there's some optional rooms where you can find things like, I believe, the map and stuff like that. And then on top of that, like, the whole dungeon, it reminds me of what they do later in Twilight Princess, but like a lot of the rooms are kind of elegantly weaved together. Like, you'll be crossing over the same rooms at like different levels or from different areas. And I think that's, I think that's a trick that later games employ that's kind of obnoxious to me. But here in like the first dungeon, I think this is actually an appropriate place to do it, because it does make you feel like you're going through this big old complex structure, but like you're actually kind of taking more of a guided path than you realize. And so I think this is good now for actually setting up how these things work. I really like, you do a loop and you get the big key, and this game really shows you more how the big key is going to work, because in the last dungeon you got it, you use it, you're done. And here it shows you get the big key and you can use it to unlock the big chests that you have, and you get the dungeon item of the bow from it. And then it also is used to unlock a door, which a lot of people usually are accustomed to it being the boss door. But in A Link to the Past, it's like there's a whole nother portion of the dungeon that you see, and they'll use it to different effects in this game. Somewhere you'll use it pretty early and it like sets a tone. You could use it early in the dungeon and then have this whole area to explore, and it's like, wow. Or you can use it like much later and it can be used to kind of like build up tension, like you're getting closer to the end. It really allows for different like sort of feeling and like pacing in the dungeons. And here I think it's appropriate where you do a little loop, you get the item, and then you have now a section of the dungeon where you're going to be using it more, because you'll have like the red Igors and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's used to pretty good effect here. And then we're finally taken all the way to the boss, who are these Armos Knights. And I don't know, this is kind of I guess it's a pretty decent first boss, compared to all the other ones we've experienced in the other games. It's pretty straightforward, but they're cool, kind of classic enemies. Just a bunch of bouncing Armos statues. They take a lot of hits with your sword, but with a bow they only take a couple, which I think is really cool. That is a good way to use the item, I think, at times, which is it'll make the fight a lot easier, but you still have other options that you can use against the boss, which I think is a good kind of middle ground compared to, like, we'll get later in the series and it'll kind of just be like you go through the motions of using the item on the boss, follow a very specific path that they want you to do, where everyone's fight's going to be exactly the same. And here, that could not be the case. You could be out of arrows, so you got to go with your sword, stuff like that. Overall, I think a pretty solid boss fight. And so now we're going to be placing this on our list here. And I think, this is a pretty straightforward dungeon, but I do really think just already we're seeing the structure of Link to the Past is very strong, I think, and it's also not, we're going to see that it's not formulaic. Like, this built off Hyrule Castle, but it was different enough, and we're going to see other dungeons mess around with the tools that the elements that they've established for dungeon exploration in this game. So I already think it is kind of better than like the average Legend of Zelda dungeon. Like, I think it is better than even one of my favorites, the Snake. But I don't know, it's still pretty straightforward. It kind of lacks the grandiosity of the final dungeons of the previous games, and it does continue to build on the game. It's very good, but I do think I have it below those. I do have it below those final dungeons from the last games and Hyrule Castle, because I don't think it has fully that excitement, but I do think it serves its purpose very well. So I'm going to place it at the number 4 spot, because I still think it's very strong for what it is. And so there we go. We have 2 A Link to the Past dungeons in our top 5 now. It's starting to take up space here. So we've got the Snake at number 5, Eastern Palace at 4, Great Palace at 3, Death Mountain at 2, and we still have our number 1 dungeon as the Hyrule Castle introduction from A Link to the Past. So let's see, we're going to continue on. We've got the Pendant of Courage. We're going to go talk to Saharasla and see, where our journey will take us next. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one.